Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and hi from Beijing. My name is Ádám Breuer. Thank you all for coming. My apologies for not being able to be with you there today at the B'nai Brit conference, but if I understand correctly, most of you are joining from abroad. With your permission, I'll be speaking in English today, and hopefully there will be Hungarian subtitles running at the bottom of the screen. So I'm Ádám. I live in Beijing. I work for the Hungarian Embassy and the Hungarian Cultural Center, and I spent years researching the Jewish communities of China earlier on in my study, so I would like to shortly present them to you today. Basically, just the most important parts, just to keep it short and to the point. So the Jews in China, I would just like to point out right from the front that the symbol that we see here, the Star of David, with the Chinese character of the Middle Kingdom in the center of the Star of David, is a logo of a newly formed, I wouldn't call them a Jewish community, it's a website, you can check it out, it's called ChineseJews.com, of the Hong Kong American Israeli cooperation to research the background of Chinese Jews. But let's get right into it. So first of all, going back to history a little bit, let me just see if I can actually use this Zoom. And if oh, wonderful. Yes, I can actually use them, and hopefully you'll be able to see it on. So very early on, let's go back to the very beginning. We're talking about the Silk Road, of course, the Silk Road, which has been existing. It's the part that we see here in yellow and green, starting way through the Middle East. We have Egypt, and we have even Greece, the Turkish-Greek border right over here, going all through Central Asia and all the way to China. Of course, this is what we call the Silk Road, and Jewish merchants have been walking on this road for millennia, of course. Now, where the very first origins of the Jewish community date back about 2,000 years, we have some not really historically confirmed evidence that we had Jews back in the Eastern Han Dynasty back in 25 of the Common Era that lasted up until 220. But these evidence are, shall we say, not the most trustworthy at all. What we do know that during the Song and Tang Dynasty from the 7th century onwards, we do know about Babylonian and Persian Jews living and working in China throughout what was then China, of course. Now, these communities, these Babylonian and Persian communities, created one of the first Chinese Jewish settlements that we know up until today, the city of Kaifeng, or the Kaifeng Jews, as they are still known today. We can see some images of drawings of them back then. They have created a distinct community by the time of the Song Dynasty. Now, what we have to understand is that from a Chinese perspective, Abrahamic religions such as Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are exactly the same thing. There's the same kind of trouble that we face when we try to understand the differences between the different branches of Buddhism, for example. It doesn't say much to us, obviously for them. They're worlds apart, but the same situation is true the other way around. So even from the very beginning, when Jews settled in Kaifeng, to the Chinese, they were part of the Muslim community, and there were Muslims back then in China, many Muslims, and the Jews simply very quickly assimilated into the Muslim community, to the extent that though they called themselves Jews and kept Jewish rites, they did transform the religion from a matrilineal descent to a patrilineal descent, which means that you're Jewish if your father is Jewish. Now, I will get back to this later on. It's a huge problem up until today, but Chinese Jews traditionally inherit their religion, their Judaism, based on the father. Now, we do know that these Babylonian and Persian Jews did grow in numbers, but the first big wave of, I wouldn't call it immigration, but of Jews arriving in China was during the times of the British Empire. Obviously, the Brits ruled all of India, parts of Central Asia, and the southern parts of China, namely Hong Kong, and had a very big influence in Shanghai later on as well. And during the first Opium Wars in the middle of the 19th century, many Jews arrived to China, mainly from India. Again, we're not talking about Ashkenazi Jews, we're talking about very strict Sephardi and Mizrahi communities arriving to China from India, through India during the First Opium Wars, when British commerce was basically ruling Asia, and Jews arrived because or due to that commerce as well. Now, we do have early records of Jewish settlements in China. Just like I said, the Kaifeng Jews was always the most significant community, though we do know about 8 other cities across China that did have Jews throughout history. We do have in the British Museum today a few relics, like the one we see here, right over here on the screen, back from the 8th century, discovered by, I hope at least the Hungarians will know, Stein Aurel, the big Hungarian, world famous and Jewish, by the way, researcher. And we do have some other evidence of historical presence of Jews in China, mainly through commerce as well, and mainly because there was vast cooperation with the local Muslim communities, as it was everywhere else in the world throughout history between Arabs and Muslims. Now, we do have some records of printings, or not of printings, of tomes and monuments of Jews. We have 3 specific ones that I would like to point out. One from the 15th century, the second from the early 16th, and the last one from the late 17th century, which are basically evidence of synagogues that existed throughout China at that time. Now, back in the day, and we're talking, when I say back in the day, we mean the Song dynasty later on, so the 11th and 12th century, there was already a significant Jewish community in China, and the Jews were given their own family names. Everyone who has ever studied sinology knows that a family name is an issue in China. A name in specific is an issue in China. So the Jews received 7, later 8 special names from the local governments that they could use, and those became official Jewish names. Today, to the Jewish names. Now, today, these names, these family names like Ai and Shi and Gao, do not mean that a Chinese person is Jewish in any way whatsoever. Only from the vast array of family names existing in China at the time, Jews were allowed to use these specific ones. It's very similar to the situation of 19th century Austro-Hungarian Empire, when Jews were forced to buy names, and that's where we have the Goldman and the Silberman and the Silberstein, etc., all from. So it's a very similar situation. What we have a little here is the Kaifeng synagogue back from the Middle Ages, or a model of it at least. It does not look like that, unfortunately, today. Now, if we jump a little bit in history, because I know we have absolutely no time here, I would just look to point out that Sun Yat-sen, the founder of the Republic of China, was a very prominent supporter of Zionism. He did think, or he did believe, that Zionism could be used, the idea, the concept, to rid the Chinese of the Brits once and for all, and the French and the German and the Japanese, etc., but mainly from the Brits. And he did use Zionism as a tool, as an example ideology of how to bring freedom, or basically freedom, from a foreign ruler, from a foreign empire. Now, in the 20th century, the situation started to change vastly for the Jews in China. Of course, we're talking about, by this time, main 4 centers of Jews, them being Harbin, Hong Kong, Beijing, and Shanghai. Russian Jews arrived en masse during the October Revolution back in 1917, really to the city of Harbin first and foremost, and that is what we see over here, a Jewish school, a Jewish high school from 1918, built in the city of Harbin. European Jews arrived by the thousands, of course, during the Second World War, because China was an enemy of the Allies. Obviously, it was later conquered by Japan during the Second World War, who were allies with the German. But we can say that in the 1940s, we have about 36,000 Jews already living across China, mainly in those 4 cities. Now, during the Second World War, as I said, China was mainly occupied by the Japanese, or at least parts of it were, which meant the Jews had to go into ghettos. The Japanese were afraid to kill the Jews. They were very afraid of Allied retribution for that, so they didn't actually touch the Jews, but they were forced into ghettos in Shanghai during the Second World War, from which they survived later on, mercifully. Now, in the late 20th century, and this is basically the part I would like to emphasize a little bit, today we are not talking about Chinese Jews. Anyone who was ever a Chinese Jew has left China long ago, either through assimilation and they no longer exist, or all 16 of them that we know of today have already done Aliyah and live in Israel. I'll get to them in a moment. What we do have in China today are Israeli Jews, American Jews, and European Jews who have been here now for a generation or two. We do have a new generation of half Jew, half Chinese children. They are reaching their 20s, so I do have to say that it's starting to reformulate, but we are talking first and foremost about foreigners who live and work and study in China. One of the most important communities is called Kehilat Beijing. We can see their magnificent, I have to tell you, logo here, the name of the city of Beijing with a little Star of David inside. I wouldn't call this a reform community because it's not. It could be said to be similar to the American conservative or the European neo-law community. They are very open and accepting towards all, and they have a very, very strong community life. Now during coronavirus, it is all done online, of course, but as in China, where it seems that we're done with the virus, community life is starting again. They are already planning for the high holidays. Now in the 80s and in the 90s, the question of Judaism arose again as the new People's Republic of China left the Cultural Revolution in '76 and Deng Xiaoping started to modernize the country for the sake of foreign relations. We see several Jewish institutions that were formed in this era. There was a Center of Jewish Studies formed, an institute, and in universities they did start talking about Jewish religion. In the 21st century, and this is the most recent, we also have obviously Chabad. How could we not have Chabad? We have the Shlichim everywhere in the world, which was formed in 2001. They are again gaining people, again from Israelis and Americans and Europeans who come to join their services, their prayers, their high holidays. If you want to eat kosher in China, there is not much else you can do than turn to Chabad, obviously. What most Jews do is simply eat at the Muslim restaurants. They basically eat a simplified version of the same. Now, I'd like to talk about some specific issues with Chinese Jewry, as we say. First of all, the biggest problem is a patrilinear descent. Now, that, besides or in addition to the fact that we're talking about a traditional taboo or something completely against Jewish religion by law, because Jewish women were raped so many times by conquerors throughout history that logically it is the mother who matters because the father is never certain. And the Chinese did exactly the opposite, following the Muslim way. This means that the law of return does not apply. They are not, from a halakha perspective, considered Jewish and have not been considered Jewish for more than 900 years now. So this is not a new phenomena. They always followed, or in the past 800-900 years, followed the patrilinear descent, which means that from a perspective of halakha, they are not Jews in any way whatsoever. So the law of return does not apply. If they want to do aliyah, they have to convert to Judaism first. The other problem is that in China, Judaism is not a recognized minority. Chinese society is built up of 56 official minorities, or the Han Chinese, and an extra 55 minorities, be they religious or ethnic in any way whatsoever. But the Jewish community, as on last count, it still counted about 12 people of actual Chinese people who consider themselves Jewish, who are still in China. It is not an officially recognized minority. Now, why is that a problem? Because if you are an official recognized minority, the one-child policy doesn't apply. Now, that policy doesn't apply to anyone since last year. It has been completely overturned. But up until then, if you belong to an official minority, you could have as many children as you wanted. The second problem is that if you are a member of a minority, you get easier entrance to institutions of higher education, because by law, it is defined that they have to have a certain percentage of minorities represented in the student body. So because Jews are not an official minority, they do not get this easement, if you wish, of joining a higher institution. Now, Aliyah is really performed by the Shavei Israel organization. By 2016, we had 16 people who did Aliyah to Israel. They all had to convert officially because they are not considered Jewish at all. Here we can see a group of the last group of girls who went. This is a huge diplomatic problem because China doesn't look well upon citizens who wish to leave, especially for claiming to be part of a minority that in China doesn't exist. Because this is not a real issue today, I wouldn't call it a problem. There is, as I said, a generation of half Chinese, half Israelis, or half Chinese, half American, European Jews that grow up now, but they do have an option to choose which citizenship they want to. Most of them will choose the Chinese citizenship first because they cannot get that back afterwards. And if they change their minds later in life, they can apply for an Israeli or an American or a European citizenship, which would be much, much easier to get. Now, that is all I wanted to say from all the way here in China. I hope you could follow and that it was mostly understandable. I apologize that I couldn't answer your questions, but B'nai Brit knows all of my contact details. So if there's anything I can assist or help with, please don't hesitate to let me know. Thank you and 再见.